Hello everyone, welcome back to the Midnight Paint and Body channel. In this video, I'm going to go over with you how to replace rockers and cab corners on a 99 to 07 style GM truck. So like you can see here guys, so what we're working on is I think it's an 02, 03, I'm not sure. Chev or GMC, I guess this one's a Chev. Crew cab style. Now I know, I think if you go a little ways back on my channel, I have done a video on these before. I think it was a regular cab truck actually. I did the video on. I figured we'll do another one. This is just a good candidate to do a video on. Now this is how the truck came to me. It's a customer's project. So being that, I mean, the bed is off and the front fenders are off, this is a nice one to, you know, we've got full access, lots of access for the camera, so I can really show you guys what's involved. So I'm gonna get digging into it. So the first thing is I'm basically gonna strip it down. I'm gonna get the doors off. Not gonna bother filming all that. Now these GM doors, they can be a little tricky. The rear doors on these crew cabs, you can get in there and unplug for the power options. Unfortunately, the front doors on these style trucks, you have to get the door panel off and you have to get in and undo the harness at the lock and the windows and the window motor and everything else, the mirror, and then feed the harness through the door. So they're a little bit of a pain in the butt, but not the end of the world. I've done a million of them. So once I've got her torn down and ready to start cutting apart, I'll bring you guys back. So there's our doors off. So you can see, like I said, on the crew cabs, you can unplug the rear door. Front door, you have to feed the whole harness through. I've done so many of them, really it's not a big deal. You just follow through, find the plugs. Most of these you can just kind of hook that little guy there with your thumb, pull it up, and these pull right out. They're not tough, but if you haven't done it before, it can be a little frustrating. So next thing we're going to do is just get as much of this interior out of the way as we can. Basically just these step pieces. Most of this just clips into place. Again, not going to film it. I'm just going to pull this apart, and I'll bring you guys back again once those are off. So with everything out of the way, it's a good time to clean out all these troughs. Look at how much mud and dirt is packed into these things. And that's just from the dirt in your interior. I mean, obviously a work truck is going to be different than your street truck, but... So I'm going to take a minute to get all this all vacuumed out, get it all cleaned up in there the best I can. And then we'll move on to some cutting. So our next project is going to be separating this pinch weld, or starting to get it ready to separate anyway. So I'll show you what I do on these. So typically these ones, these rockers, I usually cut them right around here. So we're not getting up into this part, which we typically don't have to. You see we got a bit of rust there, that might just be staining. But that part will get cut out anyway. And then around here we'll probably be cutting round about there. We'll figure all that out when we get closer to that. So up until where we're cutting here, all of these spot welds need to be drilled out. So what I do with these, I'm just going to take a hammer and center punch, just give them a whack. Now, if you don't have spot weld cutters, just use a big drill bit. These are how I always do them. Now, you don't want to drill right through because that metal on the backside is what we're going to be welding to. So you want to just kind of like drill halfway, and I'll do a couple here and then I'll show you guys what I mean. So just for reference, if you can kind of see that, so drilled about halfway through. So now when we get a hammer and chisel in between those two layers, those are going to separate a lot easier. Most often you're going to miss a little bit of the weld. Like actually I can see on this one the weld goes up a little higher if you don't get them perfect. But you know, I actually just use an air chisel on those and it's going to just separate all that, no problem. But when we're ready for that, we'll come back to that. In the meantime, I'm just going to drill out all these, probably up to here. And then the same at the front. And get those out of the way. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut out just a rear section of this rocker, just for reference, just to kind of show you guys what's involved before I move on to the front section. So again, here's, I say it all the time on these videos now, no matter what you do on the outside of your vehicle, I mean, obviously you want good primer, good epoxy, stuff needs to be finished good, but the outside is never where rust comes from. Now you see how wet this is in here and how much crap is sitting in there. All of that sits in there and stays wet, and that's what rusts your truck through. You know, whether it's in the rockers, the fenders, and the bedsides, you know, that's the stuff that, if you can, you need to keep clean, like up inside your bedsides and fenders. You know, rockers, you can only do so much. You see every truck has, see, they've got those access plugs. So, I mean, you can get in there, I suppose, and clean the stuff out somewhat, but, you know, you can only do so much. But, obviously not when it's wet. But what I like to do with older trucks, and I always do after I do all the welding, put new rockers and stuff on these, I'll pull all those access plugs out. I've got a pressure pot I fill with used motor oil. I'll stick it inside there and hose the crap out of these things until they're pouring oil out the bottom. You know, it's a little messy for a while, but at least it seeps into all those seams and everything, and it's going to coat the inside of everything with oil. So it's, you know, it's one preventative thing. That's something I've always done. But anyway, I'm going to cut some more. I'm just going to trim this off, and then we'll have another look at it. So these are obviously also spot welded along the bottom to the inner panel. So those are a little tougher to drill out because usually you can't see them, but if you take a wire wheel on your drill or grinder and clean them off, that usually brings them up pretty good. I'm probably just going to take the air chisel and go through and bust off those welds. You have to be careful because a lot of the time the inner rockers will be soft and you don't want to mess those up. Most often on these trucks you're replacing them. In this case we're not, and actually we're in pretty good shape. They're looking pretty darn good actually. So I'm going to clean that bottom off, and then I'm going to strip off the rest of the rocker, and I'll bring you guys back when we get to the cab corner. So if you do a lot of this kind of stuff, get yourself one of these cheapo drill bit sharpeners. Now this one is hard to do one-handed. This one's, like I say, it's a cheapy one. It's Princess Auto, like 40 bucks, which is, Princess Auto was like Harbor Freight in the US, basically the same store, I'm sure. But they actually work really darn good. I've, yeah, sharpened these. I mean, these were just cheap drill bits, but I sharpen them over and over. And with doing a lot of this kind of stuff, it's, yeah, it's a money saver. It's actually works really well. That's your tool tip of the day. Cheap tools. I just figured I'd show you guys on this before I start separating this front section of the rocker. Now, usually, I'll just do these with the fenders on these trucks. I mean, typically, the metal is always good up at the front. The rust, it gets worse the farther you go back, because all the water, all the crap and everything obviously runs to the back. So that's where the worst rust is. These are usually good up here. So I bet you 90% of these that I've ever done, I've done with the fenders on. I will typically cut them right about here, and then just leave that little bit, the front section of rocker, and then I will butt weld the new ones. I'll cut the new ones to fit and just butt weld them up and weld them up solid. This is nice thick steel, and those aftermarket rockers are also nice and thick. They're probably like 14 gauge. So, you know, that's no problem doing that. Just take your time and fit them up. So moving on to the cab corner. So I've got the rocker for the most part cut off. Probably still some more trimming to do, but we'll get back to that after. So now with our new cab corners, you can see they give you a little extra. Now these, if you were to use the whole piece, you could come up to above that body line. I've never found one yet where I've gone up that far. Typically what I'll do with these, I'll cut them round about here, see how the metal is. If we're into clean metal, which we usually are, then I'll cut that cab corner and we'll just keep it here somewhere. It's always nice to stay below that body line. Often when I do these trucks, we just do rockers, cab corners, and sometimes paint the bottom of the doors and just paint up to that line. So that's another reason it's nice to stay there. So I've already gone ahead and drilled out these spot welds along the inside. So I'm going to make a cut around about there and right around the back. Now, you always want to keep in mind too, doing this stuff, it's good to know what's inside. You don't want to just start making deep cuts into everything. Now, I know we're okay on these. These do have like a plastic filler or something right around there, and then there's a bunch of foam in there. So I typically just rip out as much of that as I can, because you don't want to be welding with that shit in there, or you're gonna have fire. So I'm gonna make this little cut, and let's get this cab corner trimmed off of there. Alright, so you can see how that just kind of fell off, and there's, again, I mean, there's how the inside of these panels typically look. So even if you think the rust isn't that bad, this is always what's going on the inside. Then here's that plastic filler I was talking about. So this actually has less foam than they usually have, but you don't want this crap catching on fire when you're welding these up. I actually went a little higher on this cab corner than I usually do. I'll usually cut them down quite a bit lower, but I could see that that one had bubbling all the way up here. So anyway, so I just need to get this back flange part off of there. So I'm going to do a little bit more with the air chisel, get that out of the way. So there's our cab corner out of the way. So we're actually in really good shape on this truck. The inner rockers are really solid. I'm quite surprised. They're really good. There's definitely surface rust. And now this, usually I cut these down kind of low, but you can see how easy I can move this. This is actually pretty thin up into here. So I'm going to do a little more work. We're going to take this interior trim out as well. That one's just a little more work to take out. So I think we'll be coming up definitely farther on this piece. But for now, because it's almost the end of the day, I'm just going to take a wire wheel on my grinder. We're going to clean off this whole inner rocker, and I'm just going to coat it with some rust preventative paint. I usually use POR 14 or POR 15, sorry, 14, maybe that was before that. So the POR is paint over rust. It's a really good quality rust paint. It bonds to the rusty metal, whatever it does. But yeah, that's just a little extra insurance on these things. You know, if you seal up all this rust that's in there, you know, it's going to stop it kind of continuing on at least for a few more years. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll just brush paint some POR on it. So this is what I like to use, the POR 15. You can use pretty much any rust preventative paint for this step if you choose to do this. Now this bottom lip underneath, I haven't even cleaned off all the scabs of metal yet, but that's going to need to be ground completely smooth along the bottom. It's going to be our new welding surface, and the same up here. So I'm going to get this all coated because it's the end of the day. And then tomorrow we can grind all that down, and then that'll all get coated with weld-through primer before we put the new panel in place. Well, it's the next day. I haven't done much since we left off on this. I've just cleaned up some of the welding surfaces a little bit, trimmed this back part of the rocker area back a little more. So we're going to do our first test fit of this rocker panel. So now I've just kind of rough cut everything, knowing that we've left plenty of material. This is all, yeah, just trimmed out. So we're just going to kind of get an idea where our rocker is going to sit. That's not bad. So now obviously it's not all the way into place because we're overlapping in 3 areas. So we're not all the way down onto this pinch weld here, so it needs to go in more. But what I'm going to do at this point is find something to make a mark. So I'm going to make a scribe mark on all 3 of these areas. Basically where we're going to cut, but we don't want to cut right on that mark, because once that metal's out of the way, this is going to slide in farther. And that's probably going to kind of skew that a bit. So typically what I will do, I'm going to mark this, and then I'm probably going to leave go down a good 1/2 inch, maybe more, and leave more metal than what's there, and then we'll try it again, and we'll just kind of on and off a few times till we get it just right. Now I like to put these right into where they're butt welded right up to the existing metal, no overlap. I think if you were to leave overlap on these, they would never really fit right. So I like them to get right in, you know, so they're in tight on the pinch welds and in tight, and then just butt welded to the existing metal. So here's another look with our rocker panel in place. So I've just had it on and off a few times and just, you know, trim a little bit at a time until they fit nicely. Couple of spots, you see my gaps aren't perfect, but I'll just kind of bump that into place a little more as I weld it. Another thing with these I have found with these aftermarket rockers, as long as you are on the lip properly where it should be. These door gaps are always bang on. I've never had a problem with them. But you do want to test fit your doors before welding everything solid. Definitely the back door when you put the cab corner on. So with that roughly in place, it's just on with a couple of clamps. We're going to move on to fitting up the cab corner. So we're ready to start fitting up the cab corner. So typically what I do with these, I'm just going to cut this top part off because we're not going above this body line. So I'm just going to cut that in there somewhere, and then we'll start trimming it to fit where we want it. For now, I just want to get that piece out of the way. All right, so the cab corner obviously is pretty straightforward. So what I'm going to do with that now, I'm going to clamp that in place, and I'll probably just zip cut through the cab corner and the factory corner, so we've got the exactly where we want it to be. So with that, basically, that's all we need to do for now. I'm going to take this rocker panel back off, drill all my holes for the plug welds. So we're going to be drilling all the way along here and the whole way along the bottom. Going to get some weld through primer on here, get the rocker panel back on where it's going to be for good, and then we'll finish up the cab corner. So I've got the rocker clamped in place one more time. So I'm going to go around and just do a half a dozen spot welds on it, and then we'll fit up that cab corner again. So I've gone ahead and welded up this little bit here that's going to be covered up by the cab corner. Now we're going to be taking this back off to get some primer in here before this goes on for good. And I've gone around and just done a few spot welds to keep that rocker firmly in place right where it belongs. So we're going to fit this guy up again. Now we can see where my old metal has come down. The old metal's come down to there. You can see the edge of it there. So what I'm going to do is just cut through the new cab corner, through the old existing factory metal, and then we're going to have a perfect butt match right there. So this part will usually take a little bit of fine tuning to get it bang on. Actually, it looks like we're going to be good right there. cab corner in place here now. It actually fits really darn good. Sometimes it takes more on and off and pissing around taking just tiny bits of metal off, but we got lucky, kind of nailed this one first try. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to put a small tack weld on there just to keep it in place, and we're going to get this rear door in place to make sure our lines are all good. Alright, so there's an instance where working alone can be tough. These doors are bloody heavy. Now, it can be tempting to not do this part. Think, oh, it'll be fine. But trust me, you always want to fit your doors. Alrighty. So, here we are. Our line is nice there. And actually it looks like I just need to push the back of that rocker down just a hair, but that's not a big deal. Alright, I'm going to line that up a little bit and then we'll do some more welding. So I've jumped ahead a little bit here. So I've basically just welded up the cab corner. So as you can see, we're plug welded up along the back. We butt welded right to the original metal here. And then we've got the plug welds along here. So all of our gaps are good. As you can see, we're nice and even all the way down. It's hard to tell with this black crud on this door, but we have a nice even gap all the way along for our door. So I'm going to pull the door back off and just finish up all of these plug welds all along the rocker panel. So there's our rocker all welded into place. So you can see welded solid around all the seams, plug welded on all the flanges, the same underneath. So we're plug welded to the inner rocker all the way along. And so it's the end of the day now, so it's been a little while, but I always will wait until all of the metal is cold. You know, there's no heat anywhere. I'm 100% sure that nothing's going to catch on fire after I leave the shop. But I'm going to call it a day there. In the morning, we'll get all the grounds welded, or all the welds ground down a little bit, and then I'll be moving on to the other side. So here's one side all welded up and cleaned up. So before I get into that, so you'll notice I take a lot of that black E-coat primer off. So it's an E-coat, it's an electro-coated primer that's put on this stuff, basically for shipping and storage. It doesn't always have to come off. Now, if this was a new fender on a truck, I would sand it, seal it, paint it, it's good. You can do the same on this, but just from experience, I find that because these take a lot of abuse on the bottom, all the rocks and everything, and of course the stepping in and out on the steps, I like to just get that stuff right off and put a good quality epoxy primer on. So it'll get some epoxy primer, some high build primer, and then paint. So it's just going to make it a little more durable, I have found. So, as you can see, with it all cleaned up, you know, with all the welds ground down. Now, like these areas are all butt welded, so it's just metal to metal with no overlap. So I always leave some weld. I don't take them right down till they're completely smooth, just to leave a little bit of strength there. So as you can see around these ones, but you can also see that it's just going to take a really small amount of body filler to finish those off at those welds. So that's all pretty easy. And then there's how the bottom looks, if you can see under there. So I am going to move over to the other side of the truck. I'm going to do this entire process again. And then when I get to doing that little bit of filler and primer and stuff, we'll bring you guys back for a look on this. Well, if you're still here, we're back to the rocker and cab corner job we were doing. So I've got the other side of the truck all welded up. Just got some minor finishing to do on this side, but we're going to move on to doing a little bit of filler work. So I just figured I'd quickly take you guys along. So we're going to start with just the welds. We're going to mix up just a little bit of Duraglass filler to seal those up. So I'll take you over to the Bondo bench and we'll get started. So this is the way I do it. I use this Evercoat Everglass filler first over the welds. So we're just going to mix up some of this. Just squeeze it in really good over all the welded areas. I'm not going to need much at all. And then after it's sanded off, we'll move over just to a thin skim coat of body filler over it. So pretty simple stuff. So I always just do a light coat over the welds. I'd say it doesn't take much, you just want to kind of seal them up wherever possible. You want to really squish it in there. If there is any little bit of porosity or areas that it could let some moisture through, and this is going to give it a little better chance. So the purpose of this fiberglass filler is mostly just to fill in any imperfections in the welds. So I'll typically just rough it out with a little grinder and an orbital sander. And otherwise you're doing a lot of hand sanding to get into these crevices. So there's our fiberglass filler knocked off. I'll bring you guys in for a look. So as you can see, we're not trying to fill a whole bunch with it. I'm just leaving enough in there that it's filling kind of around the welds and it kind of seals everything up. It's just another kind of little extra step of protection. So it's all blown down, so let's go mix up a little body filler now. All right, so let's mix up a little body filler. So this is the stuff I like, it's an Evercoat product. Now there's many, many different brands of body fillers out there. I'm just showing you what I use. You may very well be using something different, and it's all good. I'm not going to need much at all of this stuff. It looks like a lot more than it is putting it on, because I'm going to be coating it pretty good, but we really don't have much to fill. We're really just smoothing stuff out. So sanding our body filler, we're going to be taking a little more time to do this because this has got to be finished nicely. So sometimes stuff like this, I mean, you don't always have to have fancy tools. I've got a little block of foam. If you sandpaper stuck to it, it's going to fit that contour nice. So I'm not going to get into a whole bunch of this part. I mean, sanding body filler is what it is. But I'll bring you guys back when we're ready to mask this thing up for some primer. Well, there we are, all filler sanded, ready for some primer. So I'll just bring you guys in for just a little bit of a look so you can see very little filler just to finish off those welds. So next time you see it, I'm going to have it in a paint booth and we'll get some primer on it. I just need to figure out how I'm going to get it over there. A shop full of non-running vehicles. And a wet and mucky yard. Well, good morning again. So here we are in the paint booth. So we've got everything masked up to get some primer on these rockers. So I'll just give you a little look at the bodywork just so you have an idea what kind of gets done. So everything's just kind of smoothed off. It's, like I said, just a small amount of filler. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting some epoxy primer on. So what'll happen here will be 2 coats of a good quality epoxy primer and then probably 2 coats of urethane high build primer, and then we will let her sit and just get it prepped up for paint after that. So I've got the rockers and cab corners in primer. So like it just kind of showed you a little bit at the start. That's 2 coats of epoxy primer, 2 coats of a urethane high build primer. So I'm not going to get into the painting process on this one. I mean, I've done videos on that stuff, but from this point, I'm just going to sand everything again, and I'll just paint the rockers complete, in and out, and then get the doors back on, and this one is ready to go back to the customer. And then as you can see, I put a couple of coats of POR 15 on the entire frame for them. So that's just going to make it nice and clean and tidy when I put it back together. It's going to look good. So, as always guys, thanks so much for watching. If you find these videos helpful at all, if you enjoy the content, do me a favor and just hit the subscribe button and the like and whatever. Channel is almost 1,000 subscribers, so that's really cool. So yeah, hit subscribe. You never know what the next one's going to be. We'll see you next time.